So I'm going to introduce the first session this afternoon. First speaker, Meryl Harrell. Meryl Harrell is the Deputy Undersecretary for Natural Resources and Environment at the U.S. Department of Agriculture, where she works closely with the USDA Forest Service. Harrell previously served in NRE for 8 years during the Obama-Biden administration, including serving as Chief of Staff and Senior Advisor to the Undersecretary. Prior to returning to USDA, Harrell served as the Executive Director of the Southern Appalachian Wilderness Stewards and founded a consulting practice advising nonprofit organizations, foundations, and government agencies working to conserve and manage public land, address wildfire risk, build social and economic opportunity through outdoor recreation, and increase equitable access to careers in conservation. Harrell previously worked on public lands issues at the Wilderness Society in Washington, D.C. Harrell received her J.D. from the Yale Law School and her undergraduate degree in geoscience and environmental studies from Princeton University. She can often be found hiking on trails in our national forest with her family. So help me welcome to the podium Meryl Harrell.
Bring this down a bit. There you go. Good afternoon. It's really great to be here, and I just want to thank you for the opportunity to join you at this symposium and really engage and learn and listen from you all. I'm glad to share greetings on behalf of Secretary Vilsack and Undersecretary Wilkes, as well as my colleagues in the Forest Service. I know we have a lot of Forest Service folks in the room, so if you wouldn't mind raising your hand. Forest Service. Appreciate all that you do, and especially all you do to advance tribal relations and restore tribal values, rights, interests, priorities to the land, and encourage everyone here to go up to each of you. Reed, glad to see you here as well, and help make sure that our folks are able to listen and learn from all of the great leaders in this room. USDA is extremely committed to this year's theme, restoring tribal relations and values to the land. We recognize the importance of our nation-to-nation relationship with tribes, and that the lands we currently manage are the ancestral homelands for tribal people, and that they are central for past, present, and future generations. We know that forests and grasslands are providing food, medicine, water. They have places of cultural significance and sacred sites, and that they are central to the ways of life for tribal peoples. And at the same time, tribal knowledge is central to our ability to meet the challenges for management of these places into the future. That's why this administration's been very focused on taking steps to advance tribal co-stewardship and to meaningfully change our relationship with tribes. In 2021, Secretaries Vilsack and Holland co-signed the Joint Secretarial Order 4303, which focuses on advancing tribal co-stewardship and meaningful engagement in managing lands, waters, and wildlife. In the years since then, we at the Forest Service and USDA have created a Joint Secretarial Order implementation team, which I serve on, and has met weekly. And in the first year, we really were focused on assessing all of the different mechanisms and ways that we have to be able to enable co-stewardship. So that included identifying pathways like Good Neighbor Authority, like TFPA agreements, like memorandums of understanding, agreements through the Indian Youth Service Corps, and many other pathways to be able, through consultation, to identify shared priorities and shared opportunities to work together on the land and reflect our shared values. In 2022, we were able to expand from our existing work and relationships to sign 60 new co-stewardship agreements with tribes. And last year, we were able to double that and sign an additional 120 co-stewardship agreements with tribes. Those more than now 180 agreements reflect a whole host of shared opportunities. So they range from everything from forest management, vegetation management practices, silvicultural practices, prescribed fire, cultural burning, restoring culturally significant plants, addressing non-native and invasive species, addressing watershed restoration, ecological and ecocultural restoration, wildlife habitat, range, heritage values, research, surveys of areas of cultural importance, planning, workforce development, and climate resilience writ large. And in 2022, I was so glad to be able to be here for the signing of the Good Neighbor Authority and TFPA agreement with the Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians and the National Forest of North Carolina, which I know some of the folks in this room worked on and are continuing to implement. So, and that agreement includes things like managing fire, white oak restoration, artisan values, traditional ecological knowledge, research, and forest management. So I think that set of agreements and work together indicates real progress on the ground. There's a lot more to do, but those are definite steps forward in the right direction. But I think equally important is what we have been doing with many of you, and including with ITC as a central partner, to be able to address the systems that need to change in order to really shift opportunities for access, for equity, recognizing a history of inequity and history of displacement and exclusion and harm. So there are a number of steps that we are taking to start to shift those systems. One step has included the release of the Equity Action Plan and the Tribal Action Plan from the Forest Service. The Tribal Action Plan, which is led by our Office of Tribal Relations, and as well as the chief and the entire leadership team, focuses on four main things: restoring our relationship, government-to-government relationship with tribes, upholding our trust and our treaty obligations, advancing co-stewardship, and improving relations within the Forest Service. We just recently had a summit across the entire Forest Service to advancing equity and upholding tribal sovereignty. There were 250 in-person attendees. There were a few thousand virtual attendees, and that included a track that was focused on training to be able to advance consultation, co-stewardship, and upholding our rights and the rights and responsibilities of tribes through a variety of Forest Service programs. So we're making some sustained investments in the framework, the system change, and then the capacity needed to show up differently. Another example is through the renaming of what used to be state and private forestry. That's one of our deputy areas. It now is state, private, and tribal forestry. Our co-stewardship director is here, Alicia, and that's a new position to recognize the importance of co-stewardship. We changed match requirements. Forest Service used to have non-statutory match requirements that applied to agreements with tribes. Those have now been removed, recognizing that that's not the value of the agreements that we have with tribes. So now anytime there is the ability to waive or remove a non-statutory or non-required match for an agreement with tribes, we are doing that. We are working to recognize, acknowledge, and incorporate Indigenous knowledge appropriately. We recognize we have more conversations that we need to have with many of you on how to do that appropriately, how not to appropriate knowledge, how to make sure we're able to respect data sovereignty, and fully make sure there's non-disclosure components. Just last week, the Forest Service updated its directives for planning to recognize and acknowledge Indigenous knowledge as a source of best available scientific information for planning, and that's required to be incorporated into all of land management plan revisions and amendments within the Forest Service. So taking some really concrete steps to make sure that we're fully inclusive of and recognizing Indigenous knowledge, and we're doing it in a way that is able to braid Western science and Indigenous knowledge through two-eyed seeing, cultural humility. I want to recognize Christina Eisenberg for her contributions and help in helping us think that through. We are also in the process of updating our directives on consultation. We are signing keystone agreements to be able to make sure that we're creating partnership and access. With tribes, we've created a community navigator program to try and address and remove barriers to access that appear both in individual locations, but also feed up where and how barriers continue to persist so that we can change how those systems operate in the future. I know you just had a great session on workforce development. We are very invested in thinking together about how to expand workforce development and access, including through the Indian Youth Service Corps, tribal fire crews, and more. I do want to take a second to talk about fire. There are a number of ways that we are working together to restore fire-adapted ecosystems. Many of the co-stewardship agreements highlight the importance of fire-adapted ecosystems, restoring fire to the land, and working together to advance cultural burning and prescribe fire. The recent Wildfire Mitigation and Management Commission, and I think there are a few folks who served on that commission in the room, Cody, Bill, others who served as subject matter experts. The Wildfire Commission broadly recognized the importance of tribal stewardship for wildfire mitigation, management, and long-term resilience of fire-adapted ecosystems, and made a number of very specific recommendations, including around expanding, using existing authorities, both opportunities, funding, and practice for co-stewardship, creating new authorities to enable tribal self-determination and allow USDA to create co-management agreements, to protect data sovereignty, to fund workforce development, and to recognize and advance cultural burning. And if you are looking in the Wildfire Commission report, there's recommendations 29, 30, and a few others. We take those recommendations of the Wildfire Commission very seriously. Those are recommendations to Congress, and there are ways that we can be together in action. And Cody, of course, on the commission. Really appreciate your leadership across the board, Cody. To be able to advance those recommendations and find ways to act. The recent Wildland Fire Leadership Council meeting focused on cultural burning. We had a session that Cody and Bill helped to advance and organize. Tommy was one of the speakers, and really trying to think about, from an intergovernmental perspective, how we can learn from each other and work together to remove barriers in order to enable cultural burning. Also had a really good conversation follow-up with the Indigenous Peoples Burning Network. I know some leaders from the Indigenous Peoples Burning Network are here today, and really looking forward to being able to follow up with each of you. We know there is a lot more to do. We've made some good steps, but there's a lot more that we need to do together. There's more continued learning that we need to share. There is shared leadership that we need to create, and I just want to say thank you to those of you in this room for being in relationship with us and for helping us to learn and to grow and to take and carry forward what we want to see carried forward, but to change the things that we want to see changed so that we can really have lasting and meaningful changed relationships across the board. And we can carry forward the opportunity to restore tribal relationships and values to the land. I'm really looking forward to this afternoon's sessions. I'm looking forward to hearing about all of the sessions over the next few days, and appreciative of all of my colleagues who are going to be listening and learning and taking those lessons back for us to learn from. So thanks again for the opportunity to be here with you. Thanks for your leadership, and really looking forward to continuing this critical work together.